Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I'm late. Today we have a live interview with Tom Grant. If you don't know who Tom is, he was the private investigator hired by Courtney Love on Easter Sunday of 1994. Courtney wanted Tom to find Kurt Cobain. And during the course of Tom's investigation, he discovered some inconsistencies. And after even leaving the employ of Courtney Love, he continued the investigation on his own, at his own personal financial cost, and has been working on the case till this day. So I'd just like to say that we're all privileged to have Tom live on the phone right now, and we all, I'm sure, really appreciate it. Thank you, Tom, for being here.
Thank you, Nick, for having me.
Okay. How are you doing today, Tom?
Pretty good. If you hear a little bit of a roaring sound in the background, it's starting to rain really hard here, and every once in a while, it sounds pretty loud on the ceiling here. But I don't know if you'll pick it up or not, but that's what it is. It's raining really hard right now.
Okay. I don't hear any rain right now.
Okay.
And for the audience, can everyone hear Tom? Can everyone hear Tom okay? All good? Good. So Tom, again, we're really grateful that you're here with us. And I guess I'll just start and go right into questions. So let me just open up. Just let me open up my iPad here with the questions. And of course, I'm going to ask my question first. And I only have one. I'm not going to monopolize the whole interview. And the question I have, Soaked in Bleach, the documentary, it was excellent. It's my favorite documentary regarding Kurt Cobain and his death and your work on the case, Tom. And one moment in the documentary struck me. It's when Courtney Love said, "Save the American icon, Tom." And I just want to know what you were thinking and feeling in that moment when she said that to you.
One word, just weird.
Weird?
Yeah, it was strange. She actually raised both arms with her fists in the air when she said that. And it was just one more thing that seemed strange about the whole thing. From the beginning, when I first started talking to her, red flags were going up all over. When people are missing, the reason homicide units normally handle missing persons is because missing persons can easily turn into homicides. So whenever, as a detective, and then after I became a PI, I still remembered this. When you have a missing person and there are a lot of red flags and contradictions and contradicting statements and things like that, you have to be real careful, and you have to just listen carefully and take notes. So that's why I told my partner when we left that first meeting with Courtney, when she raised her hands and said that, I told him we're going to have to take careful notes and record every conversation we had. Actually, I just made a mistake. She didn't really make that statement at our first meeting. She made that statement when I was going to be heading to Washington a couple of days later. And when I left her room that day is when she raised her arms and said, "Save the American icon, Tom."
So that moment definitely raised your suspicions even more than they were already raised.
Well, I don't, like I said, I don't know that really added to raising my suspicions. It just seemed really strange that she would say that as if it was, in a film already,
Mm-hmm.
and why wasn't she going up there? if you really believe, she was telling me that everybody knows he's going to kill himself, and he's been talking about suicide for years, and yet she's too busy in LA and worried about her husband that she doesn't want to take the time to go up there. She's sending me up there to, quote, save the American icon.
Mm. Okay, let's go to the next question. From the viewers, was there a pivotal moment during the search for Kurt Cobain where you had the gut feeling that Courtney Love was manipulating you and the investigation? If so, when was that moment, and could you describe it, please?
It was the first sentence out of her mouth when we sat down to talk to her. And she said, I actually lied to you on the phone when I told you somebody was using Kurt's credit card. And she said, I canceled his credit card and I'm trying to track it. I'm trying to track his use of the credit card to see where he's at. And that didn't make any sense. That was the first lie out of her mouth. So the very first words from her were telling me that she had lied to me. And right there, now that's not a big deal in itself, just that one little lie. But then when the lies keep coming and the contradictions keep coming and the things that she says don't make a whole lot of sense, like she says he doesn't have any money. The guy's worth millions of dollars. He can't make a phone call and get money sent to him somewhere, or find a friend locally in LA. He had plenty of friends in LA that he could go get some money from. Good grief, it's Kurt Cobain. By that time, I knew who he was, and I knew how much he was worth. So that didn't make a whole lot of sense. So our initial conversation started raising red flags. That didn't mean that I believed he was murdered initially. In fact, it was several months down the road before I got to about the 50-50 point where I was feeling, well, maybe 50% possibility that he committed suicide, 50% possibility that he was murdered. That was several months down the road. I wasn't jumping into this thing. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, as the term is used sarcastically by some people. I don't just jump into things and automatically believe there's some big conspiracy involved or that it's not what it's being reported. But I was seeing things behind the scenes that the reporters and that the press wasn't seeing, and it was being reported all wrong, and the press was being fed all this wrong information by Courtney. And we even talked about that on the phone. She was trying to get me to leak certain pieces of information to the press myself. And so, I just saw the way she operated, and it took a while for me to get to the point where I was totally convinced he was murdered. In fact, that was December of 1994, about 7 months after his body was found. I came to my final conclusion. Something happened there that just set me over the top. And by that point, I believed completely 100% that he was murdered. And if I didn't believe it 100%, there was no way I was going to go public and say anything at all.
Well, you kind of touched on the next question. I don't know if you have anything to add, which is how long into your investigation, when Courtney hired you, did you realize that the death of Kurt was pointing towards foul play? Well, you're aware, I'm sure, of the phone calls between myself and Courtney and Kurt's attorney, Rosemary Carroll, their entertainment attorney. She was suspicious right from the beginning. Now, within a couple of days after Kurt's body was found, we're on the phone talking to each other. And then when I go to her office, she, like it was depicted in the movie, she says, Tom, Kurt was not suicidal. He wasn't suicidal. And this was someone who knew Kurt and Courtney very, very well. So her own attorney telling me this, and by telling me that, she's obviously
thinking something's wrong. And she tells me then right after that Courtney had called her and asked her to find the meanest, most vicious divorce attorney she can find. So that was the beginning of my serious thoughts of possible foul play. But again, that wasn't any solid evidence that I could use or that could be used in a court of law. Those were just opinions and feelings that people were having. But it's pretty rare that somebody's own attorney is going to tell you something like that privately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I watched Soaked in Bleach again the other night because I wanted to refamiliarize myself with it. And I found those Rosemary Carroll moments. I had forgotten that a prenup was even mentioned, that Courtney asked how she could void a prenuptial agreement and stuff like that.
Yeah, that wasn't discussed with me, but that came out later in some other information.
Okay. Yeah, because there's been debate over whether Courtney had a prenuptial or Kurt had a prenuptial, and I've always said that it would be most likely that Kurt Cobain had a prenuptial. And it sounds like, in my opinion, rewatching Soaked in Bleach, it sounds like Courtney wanted to catch Kurt cheating on her or being with another woman to use that in court against him to possibly void the prenuptial. It's just an observation I made.
Yeah. By the way, talking to Rosemary Carroll, she did also tell me that Kurt called her also about the same time as Courtney, within a few days, and asked her to take Courtney's name out of his will. So, that's a separate thing from a prenuptial agreement, but that's the only thing that she discussed with me. She didn't discuss the prenuptial agreement with me.
Okay.
Okay. I'm just trying to catch my point. There was someplace. What was that? What was the last thing you just asked me?
It seems like the last question or the last observation I made.
The last thing you said right before I told you that Kurt asked her to take Courtney's name out of the will. Oh,
I was talking about, it seemed that Courtney Love was trying to have you or someone else catch Kurt with another woman to use that in divorce court to void or get around the prenuptial agreement. That's what it felt like to me.
Yeah, that's I agree with you completely. That I have a lot of tape recorded conversations between me and her. She was extremely jealous. She was highly suspicious of Kristen Path. She was highly suspicious of the drug dealer, Caitlin, apparently a pretty little blonde girl or lady. I never saw her, but according to Courtney, she was pretty. Courtney, at one point, when she told me this, and I have it on tape, she went and bought some drugs from Caitlin and then went around to the back on the sidewalk. You can see the kitchen window to Caitlin's apartment, and she threw a brick through the window. She says she was there with Caitlin, or with Kat Jalen, her friend from Babes in Toyland, and that they went and bought drugs, and then they went around the back end and threw a brick through her window.
Wow.
So, yeah, she was extremely jealous of any woman, and then when she started dating, seeing Billy Corrigan and then Trent Reznor, we have a lot of tape recorded conversations where she was having us do surveillance on them, especially Trent Reznor. She had us working on him for quite a while.
Wow.
And she was extremely jealous of him. I mean, if you're going to date a rock star like that, you got to put your jealousy aside if you're a normal human being, because there's just no way that guy's going to stay loyal to you. We had one of my guys actually got Courtney got this for him, but a pass for backstage. What do you call those backstage passes?
Yeah, backstage pass. Yeah.
Yeah, got it for him. His name was Chris. He was guy that worked for me, and he had kind of long hair, so he fit into this group a little bit better than I did. And so he went to a concert of Nine Inch Nails and then went backstage after that. And what he saw just blew him away. He said there was a line of girls just lined up down the hallway to the doorway where the band was after the performance was done. And he said most of these girls looked way underage, but they would just open the door and let one or two in at a time. And every once in a while, when the door was open, he would be able to see in there, and he would see that they were doing some sex acts, which I won't get into.
Okay.
But you know, I mean, that was the way rock and roll was, you know. I mean, I've heard those stories about other bands for years.
Right.
From what I've heard, Nirvana wasn't like that. They didn't do that type of stuff, from what I've heard.
Okay.
But I've never heard anything like that going on with the Nirvana performance.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. But, you know, in general, rock stars that are out there, that seems to be a pretty normal thing to happen. And they've got guards of their own. So if they see the police coming or whoever, anybody that gets back there has to show their ID. If it's a policeman, he's got to show that he's a policeman. It's pretty easy to protect the band from things like that, you know, to let them know if the police are there or if anybody that even looks like a police officer is headed that way.
Okay, so next question from the audience. Was there a piece of evidence that stuck out the most that pointed in your mind to Courtney's involvement in Kurt's death?
All along, everything was pointing to Courtney. And when you say involvement, I've always said, a lot of people, you know, online, they try to repeat things that I've said, or they repeat the story or whatever, and they misquote me. And, you know, just be sure if you ever read about anything about this case or whatever, or if I'm quoted as saying something, check out what I've said in the case study manual or anything else I've written online.
Okay.
Because I've always said that Courtney was still in Los Angeles when Kurt died. So Courtney never pulled the trigger. You know, there are a lot of people say, oh no, I think she flew up there and she killed him herself, you know. No, I can prove that she was in Los Angeles at the time. I have a suspicion of who did fly up there, which I won't get into, but, you know, we have 3 or 4 persons of interest that we call them. Eric Erlandson, of course, is one. Callie is another. A guy named, let me get down here to where I wrote the names. This mostly comes from the call records. Renee Navarrete, the call records that we got from the Peninsula Hotel, the people that she was calling during this period of time. And so we have persons of interest that we believe were probably involved in this. Okay. But that can never be proven until a legitimate police agency or the FBI, somebody above the Seattle Police Department, reopens this investigation and goes over their head. And then we can get in, you know, they can interview these people, and they can, once you have names of people, it's pretty easy to get them in an interrogation and get them crossed up, and the truth will come out, you know. But there was other people involved. Someone else was involved in actually setting up this thing and pulling it off. There were at least 2 people in the room with Kurt when he was shot. And that's for the authorities to determine, you know. I can only speculate. I wasn't there, but the evidence points to that. The evidence points to the fact that there's no way, absolutely no way, Kurt could have pulled that trigger, which we'll get to towards the end of this interview. I'll play some statements from the Seattle Police Department.
Okay.
But, Yeah, that's there. You know, we can talk about the point where I reached my 100% conviction that Courtney was involved in a conspiracy to have Kurt killed.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened in December of 1994 when Rolling Stone came out with a picture of Courtney Love on the front of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, bear in mind, Courtney and I had been in contact all of this time, on and off. I have all kinds of recorded phone conversations. She always tried to push me to find out information, to do everything I could, you know, to get as much information as I could, which sounded fake to me. I mean, but fact is, you know, I have her words telling me, yeah, I want you to find out whatever you can, you know. And then in this interview with Rolling Stone magazine, she tells David Frick, the guy that was interviewing her, she says, well, he left me, and he asked her, this is what throws her off. And I know Courtney's personality. So it was almost like I was watching this on video when I read this interview.
Mm-hmm.
He says, now, what do you think about the note? You know, it's kind of a strange note. I'm paraphrasing now because I don't have the magazine right in front of me,
Mm-hmm.
but he put her on the spot about the note that was found at Seattle and how strange it was. I mean, it didn't really sound like a suicide note. It was talking about to his fans and how he wasn't really enjoying the music anymore and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And so he put Courtney on the spot and tried to get her to talk about that note. And instead she said, well, he left me another note too. And right when I heard that or read that, I was startled. I thought, what are you talking about? Another note.
Mm.
And then she goes on to say, you know, she's quoting the note, and she says something like, I'm leaving. Please don't follow me. I'll be there. I'll be at your altar. No, that was in the actual Seattle note. I haven't looked at this in a long time, but it's something like, I'll be there for you and Francis. Please don't follow me. There were 2 or 3 quotes that she made from this note that were in no other notes that anybody had ever seen or talked about. So this is basically what I would refer to as a 4th note, because there's Callie's note, there's the note from Rome, there's a note from Seattle, and now this 4th note, which sometimes is referred to as the 2nd note, because it's the 2nd note that he left to Courtney at that same time in Seattle, according to Courtney. And I know that she was lying then. She was either lying then or she'd been lying to me about wanting me to find out everything I could about this, because if she had another note that she'd never told me about, then she was being deceptive to me, and she wasn't really being truthful to me about trying to find out as much as I could.
Mm-hmm.
That's a note that she would have wanted me to know about.
Right.
If she was afraid to give me a copy of it, okay, then read it to me, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But that's the type of thing that you would give to any investigator that wants to find out the truth behind your husband's death.
Mm-hmm.
And here it just happens to come out in an interview when she's put on the spot.
Mm.
And doesn't really want to answer the question that David Frick asked her.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time I read that article, I was at about 95%. You know, gradually the percentages went up. You know, after a month or so, I was maybe at a 20%, like 80% that he committed suicide, 20% maybe there was foul play.
Mm.
And then something else would happen, another conversation with Courtney, and the percentage would change, 30%. 40%, 50-50, you know, and then on up. By the time of December of 1994, I was at about 95%. And then I read that in Rolling Stone magazine, and that put me over the top. And that's when I decided to go public. And I flew to New York and did the CBS radio show with Gil Gross.
Mm.
And that's when my story first came out.
Would you be willing to share those 4 or 5 names you just said were suspects or persons of interest?
Well, I don't call them suspects. They're just persons of interest.
Persons of interest. Would Were you able to share those names?
Yeah, I think I did already, but I'll go over them again. Of course, Eric Erlandson would be one.
Okay.
Callie Michael DeWitt, the guy that was living at the house when Kurt died and was still staying at the house even after the body was dead up there. And the phone records from the Peninsula Hotel really tell a story when you look at that. Then there's this guy named Renee Navarrete who was being contacted along those same periods of time, along with Michael DeWitt, with the guy we call Callie. Okay. His nickname is Callie because he grew up in Calabasas, and that's where his parents were living.
Okay.
So Renee Navarrete, and then there's a couple others that I won't mention.
Okay.
I will say, because a lot of people suspect Kurt's best friend, what's his name? You know who I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. And his name escapes me too at the moment.
That's so funny.
Someone say his name.
Yeah, somebody say his name. Dylan.
Yes, Dylan.
Carlson.
Yes.
Yeah. Let me put that rumor to rest. I mean, people saw the film Soaked in Bleach, and they saw the film Kurt and Courtney, I think is where Nick Broomfield interviewed Dylan Carlson, and he looks a little shady in that interview, but you have to understand that the guy that made that film, he makes tongue-in-cheek films, even if they're serious films. He made a film about Eileen Wuornos, who's on death row. He made a film about Chief Gates, I think, the Los Angeles police chief. He's made several films about high-profile things, but they're always kind of tongue-in-cheek.
Right.
That's why he carries around the microphone. He shows himself on camera holding this big boom microphone while he's talking to people, and it's just, he's got kind of a little niche following of people that like his style and like to go to his movies. When Kurt and Courtney aired, or premiered, I should say, in San Francisco, I was standing by the front door talking to the owner of the theater, and who's Madonna's ex-husband? The first husband.
Sean Penn, Guy Ritchie.
Sean Penn, yeah. Sean Penn walked in with his wife, and then other people were telling me about other actors and band music people that were there that I didn't recognize, but I did see Sean Penn when he walked by. So it was a pretty big deal, but also people that follow Nick Broomfield's films, they understand his style, and they know that like when he interviewed me in the car, we were in a parking lot where I first met him. We were in a parking lot at a golf course, and, very nice scenery in the background and everything. But he wanted me to hop into his old beat up Cadillac and drive down the street to sit in the parking lot at McDonald's because I'm a little bit overweight, so the gag there was, here we are at McDonald's,
Oh.
And you can see the McDonald's sign in the background while he's talking to me. And so that's his style. It wasn't a good film at all. The best part about the film was when he interviewed the nanny, one of the nannies, this young blonde girl, and she was saying that there was, right before he died, there was all this talk about money and about wills and things like that, and it just seemed really strange, and they were fighting all the time, So that was about the most suspicious thing. He had, just to be safe, because he'd already been threatened by Courtney on this film, so just to be safe, he says in the film that he believed that Kurt committed suicide, but that Courtney drove him to it.
Okay. All right. You might want to save this question for the end when you present your points. I'm not sure. I'm just going to read the question. You decide, Tom.
Okay.
Could Kurt have actually shot himself with the amount of heroin that was found in his system? I assume the person's asking, would he have been able to shoot himself with a shotgun after taking that much heroin?
Yeah, that I do have a note after that question. We should discuss that at the very end. That's when I'll play the recordings of the Seattle Police Department spokesperson.
Okay, we'll save that one for the end. Let's go to the next one. Was Kurt given the first hot shot in the house and then taken to the greenhouse? I suspect this to be the case, as his fanned out hair looks like he was dragged into a position where nobody in the park late at night could see what was occurring. Also, you said that the house had been spotlessly cleaned.
Yeah. Well, let me answer the last sentence first. When we went in the house, when Dylan and I went in the house and started looking around, he seemed in shock. He said, "I've never seen a house this clean before." You know, usually there's clothing and socks and papers and, you know, fast food stuff all over the place. It's usually like a pig pen in here. I've never seen it this clean before. Looking back on it as I put this together later on, I realized, yeah, you know, Courtney had been trying to get the body discovered. And of course she knew that once it was discovered, the police would be up there and they'd be going everywhere. And actually in the police report, it even says that a couple of police officers went inside the house and found nothing unusual, which I'll just kind of branch off for just a second here and remind me where we're at. But the fact that the police report says police officers went inside the house and there was nothing unusual, I had left that note that Callie had written on the stairs right where I found it the second night. So for them to say that they went in the house and found nothing unusual and not even to mention this note that was on the stairs tells me one of two things. They either just peeked in the door and looked around and didn't really and maybe called out or something and didn't really go inside and look around, or somebody between the time about 2 to 3 a.m. in the morning that Dylan and I found that note on the stairs, and sometime after that, somebody went in that house and removed the note before the police got there. Those are the only two possibilities. Either way, it's really strange.
Okay.
So your question, the hot shot and then dragging him into the greenhouse, that has been spread around the internet quite a bit by one person in particular, who is your typical conspiracy theorist, who had his own little public TV show up in Seattle, and the day after Kurt's body was found, he jumps on his little TV show and starts saying, Kurt was murdered, Kurt was murdered, you know?
Okay.
Well, that's not the way you determine whether it was a murder or a suicide. You have to get a little information other than just hearing something on the news, you know?
Right.
I realized a lot of people from day one, because I've gotten these emails, a lot of people have said, as soon as I heard he was dead, I knew he was murdered. I knew he didn't commit suicide. Well, and I know what they're saying by that, but they don't really know anything. They just have that feeling there's something wrong.
Right.
They feel, you know. But you have to be able to gather information. You have to really be able to investigate and put things together and find out information before you go public and just start saying, he was murdered. I know he was murdered. And this guy has been a real thorn in the side of the Seattle authorities, because he follows them around up in Seattle and with his camera and tries to get them to interview or get them to answer questions, you know, when they're at public events and stuff. And he's just made a nuisance of himself, and he hasn't helped, you know, because of him. Of course, they don't want to cooperate with me, which they probably would not have cooperated with me anyhow, but he made it worse. And it's people like him, and there's one other person who I'm not even going to mention because I don't want his name out there. I don't want him to be considered a legitimate source, but a lot of people do consider him to be legitimate just because of his relationship to Courtney. You probably know who I'm talking about. But these two people and a couple other people who just write things on the internet have talked about they believe he was killed someplace else and dragged to the greenhouse and on like that. Well, I know enough about the situation. I've investigated. I've been in the greenhouse. I've taken photographs up there and everything. And I know enough about the evidence in this case that I'm totally convinced that Kurt died right where they found him.
Okay.
I believe somebody was up there with him doing heroin with him. And then they staged the suicide once he was totally unconscious, which would have been within just a few seconds.
Okay.
And they staged the suicide after that. And by the way, if you're not familiar, and most people aren't, if you look into staged suicides across the United States, you see a lot of them on Dateline and shows like that, 2020. They'll show them, and they'll show where they staged it to look like a suicide, but it was later proven to be a murder. It happens all the time. One thing that's in common with all of those staged suicides is the people are either on drugs, they're totally wiped out on alcohol, or they're sound asleep. Somebody will walk up to somebody asleep. This happened to Phil Hartman. I don't know that she staged that as a suicide, though, because she killed herself, too.
Mm-hmm.
But people are killed in their sleep a lot of times, and then the gun will be placed in their hand. It'll be wiped clean and then placed in their hand, and they squeeze their dead hand on the gun and on the trigger and everything to leave prints. And then when the police show up, it looks like the person shot themselves in the head right there in bed, So the main thing to remember is people, when they stage suicides, normally there are drugs involved, or the person is so drunk they don't know what they're doing or what's happening to them or anything, or they're sound asleep.
Okay. So the next question, Eric Erlandson's role in Kurt's death.
Oh, wait, can I finish something?
Okay. Oh, yes, sure.
Question?
Sorry, Tom, go ahead.
That's okay. They talked about the hair being, let's see. Let's see what was occurring. Wasn't it in that question where they asked about the hair being
right? His hair
laid out?
His hair looks fanned out. That's what the person said.
Well, if a person is sitting up and being held in that position where they're sitting up, and they have that length of hair, and they just fall back. I mean, you could even practice this on a carpeted rug. Anybody with shoulder-length hair, just fall back real quickly, maybe onto a pillow even or something soft so you don't hurt your head, and your hair will blow up like that and fall flat back behind you.
Okay.
So I really believe that's what happened. It had nothing to do with him being dragged there.
Okay. Actually, I skipped a question. The next question is, or the next statement, if you want to comment on it. The caps on the needles make me believe that they weren't the ones that were used for the final dose. I think it's Kurt's box, but it was planted later. It's interesting as well that in the pictures, there are black outlines of a spoon on the floor. It looks like it was heated from above in a hurry, not something a seasoned junkie would do.
Yeah, again, that kind of goes back to putting more into this than what's really there. A lot of unnecessary conjecture and when you try to get into the details of every little minute thing, you can come up with all kinds of conjecture, like I said. And I try not to speculate about stuff. It would be unprovable. So I just don't go there. That's something that would be looked into, if it was of interest at all, to the authorities when they ever reopen this case. And by the way, when we talk about reopening this case, I know it's been a long time, but we had a case up here on the Central Coast in California that was reopened after 50 years.
Wow.
And a man was put in prison for killing a young girl after 50 years.
Wow.
And there was another one that was about 30 years. Then we know about Natalie Wood. they changed that case from accidental drowning to unknown, I think it was.
Okay.
Which basically means that if it's unknown, then the only two people that could have had anything else to do with her murder are Robert Wagner and, what's the actor's name? I knew it right before I said that, but the tall, thin actor, he's very well known. He's still in movies a lot. He hung out with them a lot. There were rumors that he was having an affair with Natalie Wood, but he was on the boat there with Natalie Wood and Robert Wagner. So the only other two possible suspects in that case.
Christopher Walken?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Christopher Walken. The only other two suspects on that case would be Christopher Walken or Robert Wagner. Very, very big, huge actors in Hollywood. So police departments and investigative agencies move very slowly when it involves somebody with that much, with that high of a profile and that much money, and people would defend them no matter what. Just like O.J. Simpson.
Right.
I saw a picture after he was even found guilty in civil court. He was at a golf course, and this middle-aged woman goes running up to him. This is on the news, and she's all giddy, and she says, "Oh, can I have a picture with you?" And they take this selfie picture, and she's all giddy. "Oh, it's O.J. Simpson." In fact, the reporter asked her after that. He said, "Now, do you believe that O.J. Simpson killed his wife or not?" And this lady says, "I don't know, but it's O.J. Simpson." I mean, can you believe that people can be that just crazy, just because it's a celebrity? They don't care whether they're a murderer or not, they just want a picture with them.
I know, right? It's terrible.
Yeah, that's crazy to me. So,
okay.
So the point is, there are a lot of cases that get reopened many, many, many years. I really honestly didn't think it would take this long. But it doesn't mean anything to me. You just plug along and do what you do, and whatever happens, happens.
Right. Okay. So next question. Eric Erlandson's role in Kurt's death seems highly suspicious. Did you manage to pin down a timeline for his arrival at the house? Also, do you think it was him that planned the suicide note and took the note from Callie back to Courtney?
Yeah, I think that's a very good, strong possibility. But like I said, he's only one of a few people that we have as persons of interest. We do know that, I shouldn't get into these details, but we know a little bit more about Eric and where he was and what he was doing during that period of time. Now, I also was with Eric in Courtney's hotel room. He was there at one point when I was there. And just to give you an example of Courtney's temper, Eric just came into the room and said to Courtney, "You ought to go down and see your daughter." And that's all he said. He was very mild-mannered talking, at least around me he was. And she went off in a rage and was yelling and screaming at the top of her lungs. And of course, he turned his back and started walking away from her. And she was yelling stuff like, "Don't you ever tell me what to do. That's my daughter. I'll do what I want to do." And every other word was the F word,
Wow.
And I swear this went on for about a half an hour. Wow. Now, Frances was in the room with her nanny about 2 rooms down the hallway. So as Eric was walking down there, Courtney followed him the whole way down there, yelling and screaming in the hallway at the top of her lungs over this little comment, "You ought to go see your daughter," And then when she came back in the room with me, she could hardly focus on having a conversation with me. She just kept yelling and screaming, even though Eric wasn't there, she was still that angry about him doing that. And that gives you a little bit of insight into her personality and her anger problems,
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the next question, are you or have you been afraid that Courtney Love could retaliate against you? And in your mind, what has prevented her from harming you or your loved ones?
Well, I take precautions, but I don't really have any fear. The first precaution that I took was to get on the radio. I mean, I was a little bit more concerned, I would just say, before I went public than I was after. Once I was on CBS radio, which is what's that word? Sent out to other radio stations all over the country.
Syndicated.
There's a word. Syndicated. It was syndicated. It goes all over the country. I even get, I got him. I don't know if he's even on the radio anymore, but I used to hear him here on the Central Coast. So that went out all over the country. I was a little bit naive about media, and in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, now everybody's heard my theory about this, so I'm safe. Well, I was safe. I still feel, because enough people heard about it that if anything would have happened to me after that was broadcast all over the country, Gil Gross probably would have done something or said something on the radio and gotten some attention to it. But I gradually learned that for people to hear any story or to know about any particular thing in the media, it has to be repeated almost daily, certainly weekly, over a long period of time before it sticks in anybody's mind.
Mm-hmm.
So that one radio broadcast really didn't do a whole lot to spread the word. But then what followed after that was a whole series of radio shows, and then later on TV shows and a couple of films and things like that. So, but that's my best protection, is just everybody knows who I am and what I've said. So that's my best protection. That's my precaution. But in answer to you, have I ever been afraid of Courtney Love or that she'd retaliate against me? No, I really don't have fear about almost anything, really. You get that from being a police officer. You learn how to not let anybody intimidate you. I've been confronted by great, big, huge guys that were like a head taller than me and solid muscle, and they step right up to me, I tell them to go step on the curb after stopping them or whatever, and they get out of their car. Okay, go over here and step on the curb while I handle this. And they look at me and, yeah, well, what are you going to do? And I just step right back up to them, basically touching them, with my chest, sort of bumping into them. I said, I told you to go step on that curb. And it's the uniform, really. I mean, we learn this from being cops in the academy. The uniform really represents the whole state of California. So most people are smart enough not to mess with the uniform. But I was also a fairly big guy, and at that time especially built pretty well. And there weren't very many people that could intimidate me. But I just had this thing about, even if I knew somebody could beat me to a pulp, I just wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid of being beaten up or whatever. I was going to do my job. And if something happened as a result of that, I was going to do it anyhow. So fear is just not something that's really... It also comes from my personal faith. I am a Christian, and I believe God watches out for me, and whatever God allows to happen to me is intended to happen, and I depend on Him to protect me. So that's always been a part of my life.
That's great that you're a Christian. I'm a Christian too, Tom.
Oh, terrific. Okay.
1 second.
You got another question?
Next question. Since Kurt's death in 1994, it has been made evident to the public through your taped conversations with Courtney Love that she was in some way involved in Kurt's demise. Why do you think that Kurt's death hasn't been reinvestigated by Seattle police?
Well, the simple one-word answer to that would be pride. Whether it's a police department or a corporation or anything, people don't like to admit that they made mistakes. There's promotions involved. You can be written up if you do something that's really bad. The public was told that there was a suicide note at the scene by this female spokesperson for Seattle PD that came right down from the greenhouse. We have video of her talking to the media, saying that there was a suicide note found at the scene, and that's all it took. And everybody ran to their telephones and called their press rooms or their TV stations or whoever they worked for, and said, "Yeah, it was a suicide. Kurt Cobain committed suicide." So that's how it started being reported immediately, all over TV, on MTV, every place, just from that one little statement that she made. And then, of course, the police have to stay with that once it's reported like that as a suicide, and especially due to the fact that there are other copycat suicides going on like crazy. The police aren't going to back up and say, "Oh, no. We made a mistake here. We've looked into this closer now, and we don't really think it was a suicide." But what are they going to tell the parents of those kids that killed themselves, So that's the first thing. And proof of this is if you watch shows like 48 Hours or 2020, they show these cases on a regular basis where somebody will be convicted of, let's say, murder. That's the biggest case you can be convicted for. Murder, and they're sent to death row. They're sitting there on death row for 10 years, and something occurs that another person all of a sudden becomes a suspect of that murder that other guy was convicted of. And now they have DNA testing that they didn't have back then when they put this guy on death row. And their new suspect actually confesses to committing the murder, and the DNA actually proves that he's the one that raped this woman and killed her. And so they go through the court process and everything. They get the guy out of prison that was on death row. The new guy gets convicted, sent to death row. And then the 48 Hours team goes back to the police department or to the district attorney's office, and they talk to the people that, were involved in getting this guy convicted. And inevitably, in fact, I've only seen one exception to this out of probably close to 50 at least that I've seen over the years. I'm an old man, so I've seen it a lot. Inevitably, the people that made the initial arrest or the district attorney that pressed charges of murder against that person, they'll say, "I still think we had the right guy." Can you believe that?
Yeah.
Somebody confesses to the murder. They have DNA evidence that proves that guy confessed. But since they sent somebody to death row, they're not going to admit that they made a mistake.
Right. I've seen cases like that as well on different shows.
Yeah.
That's terrible that they wouldn't just admit they were wrong. Terrible.
It's really amazing. It was sometime, I think about a year ago, I was watching one of those shows, and they did go back to the detective that was completely convinced initially that this person was guilty and went to death row. But he admitted, he said, "Yeah, we blew that one. We made a mistake." Just like the chief of Seattle Police Department that was the chief in 1994. It was so rare for somebody like him to come forward, and you see it in Soaked in Bleach, where he says, "If I were the chief today, I would reopen that case."
Yeah, I remember that.
I mean, it's really rare for somebody to say something like that. That's on, even though they're retired. Even though he's retired.
I just wish he would have thought like that back when he had the authority to do something.
What's funny is Dylan Carlson, I even rode the elevator with him when we were there to see the Sergeant Cameron. We were going up to the third floor, which is the homicide floor. And when we got in the elevator, the police chief got in. I didn't know who he was. He was in plain clothes, and Dylan leaned over and whispered to me, and he said, "That's the chief of police there." So I wish I would have got to see him on the set. but he was there right before I got there.
Oh, okay.
And I'd like to have told him, hey, I rode the elevator with you when I was in Seattle.
Okay. Next question. What would it take to get the Cobain case reopened?
It would take a really hardcore journalist that had a little bit of clout, somebody from maybe 48 Hours, 2020, or even a major magazine, but somebody that could report this accurately and that would record the conversation to sit down and talk face to face with the spokesperson for Seattle PD and ask the hard questions. Now, as you'll see later on when I play these statements from the spokesperson from Seattle PD, if a new journalist or another journalist would go and talk to either the same guy or to somebody else, this guy actually is retired now, but they would have somebody that they would assign to speak to the journalist if they would even allow an interview, which I doubt they would. But if they could get it on tape and ask the hard questions, well, now your spokesperson before said that he took a fatal dose of heroin, and everybody knows how fast heroin gets to the brain, So how could you say he took a fatal dose and yet say that it was a suicide? There's no way he would have had time to do that, and have that discussion, because that's the major piece of evidence. And it's never been disproven. People can say, oh, that's been refuted. And people can write to me and say, oh, I've taken more heroin than that. And it doesn't affect me. You don't know how the heroin was cut. You don't know how much heroin you've taken when you take it, because you don't know what it's cut with and how much actual heroin is in there. When they do an autopsy from a dead body, they get the actual heroin or morphine blood level, not the amount that was injected in milligrams or anything, but they get the actual heroin level, not including baby powder or cornstarch or anything else. So when people tell me they shoot up, so many milligrams or grams or anything like that, first of all, that's just anecdotal. I'd like to see proof of that. I'd like to see that done in a laboratory condition, where the heroin is tested, and then this person injects the heroin and still stays awake and walks around. I don't believe that's ever happened. I put the challenge out years ago. It's in my case study manual right after Nick Broomfield did the film Kurt and Courtney, because he quotes some dingbat doctor in England that says he has patients. He has a patient that took, I think he said 1,000 times more than Kurt Cobain took, and he could still balance on one leg. And that's what he put in the movie. But the truth is, and I have the documentation of this, I have the emails from Nick and everything. And I spoke to that doctor in the UK. That guy didn't take heroin. He took methadone, and he swallowed methadone. If Kurt Cobain would have swallowed 5,000 milligrams of pure heroin, there's no doubt in my mind he would have had time to kill himself.
Right.
Because getting to the brain from the stomach takes some time, takes 30 seconds to a minute at the very least before you're even going to start feeling any of that. But when you inject it directly into a vein, it's going to go immediately within seconds to your brain. And so to compare swallowing methadone with injecting heroin are two totally different things.
Yes.
So I say, show me one example in history, out of all the records that are kept by police departments and by medical examiners and coroners, where there's evidence that someone has shot up that much heroin and they've lived long enough to have committed suicide. And then I give an example. For example, there's 4 guys watching a football game. One of them gets up and he goes to the bathroom, he shoots up heroin, and he comes back and he sits down on the couch, and then he keels over dead. They do an autopsy on him, and he has 1.52 milligrams per liter, like Kurt Cobain did, of morphine or, well, heroin, which turns into morphine after it enters the brain. If you find that where the man was just able to walk out of the bathroom and come in and sit down on the couch before he keels over dead, then you've proven to me that Kurt Cobain could have committed suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I put that challenge out there over 15 years ago, and there are a lot of people with a lot of money that could afford to do that research and come up with one case at least. There hasn't been one single documented case that anybody's ever presented to me.
Mm-hmm. So, next question. If you could go back in time, would you still take on the investigation into Kurt Cobain's disappearance and subsequent death? Why or why not?
Well, I take things as they come, and I believe we all have a purpose in life, and I believe this case was one of those purposes for me. I have no regrets. There are a lot of things I don't like about it, a lot of things that really annoy me. But, you know, when you do what you believe you're supposed to do, you just do it, whether you like it or not.
Okay, so last question. What does it feel like to know that your name, Tom Grant, will be forever associated with Kurt Cobain's name?
Well, it doesn't mean anything to me in the way that I think most people are thinking about this. Kurt was the famous, talented musician. I was just a PI doing my job. You know, people who get famous, you know, you can get famous for killing a president, you know. I mean, people can get fame in all kinds of ways. You know, you can get fame for having 8 children, you know. There's all kinds of ways to get famous. When I was with Paula Jones once, we were in a restaurant having dinner. Now, Paula Jones just happened to be exposed to and sexually harassed by the then governor of Arkansas, but became the president of the United States. So it was a big, major case. And she was on the news almost every night and on the Tonight Show, and you know, they're making fun of her and making jokes and all that. So she had that kind of fame. But it was only because it was attached to a president of the United States. You know, if it was somebody else, nobody'd know who Paula Jones was. But it was really weird. We were in a restaurant eating dinner with me and her and her husband, and this waitress comes up and she starts staring at Paula, and then she starts literally shaking. She goes, "Are you Paula Jones?" And Paula said, "Yes, I am. She has that southern accent. And the woman, the girl, the young girl, 19 or 20 or whatever, just literally started shaking and crying. You know, what's that all about? Just because Paula Jones is in the news all the time, you know, she didn't really do anything herself to be famous. She just happened to be attached to somebody who was famous. And so, you know, everybody treats her like a celebrity only because she's in the news. And you know, there's nothing that I feel like attaching fame to me or to my name or anything. I just a PI doing what I was hired to do.
Okay. How about we take like 1 or 2 questions from the audience quickly?
Yeah.
Okay. If anyone wants to ask a question, why no surveillance camera recordings from the house? How about that?
There were none at that time. When you see photographs of the house and you see a surveillance camera on the garage, for example, that's what Gary, the electrician, was there for. The guy that discovered the body, he was putting up that surveillance system.
And this question, was Kurt wearing his wedding ring when he was found?
There's no evidence of that, and it's not listed in the police reports, if I recall. That's one of those things where I understand the interests that everybody has that's a Nirvana fan or that was, really loved Kurt Cobain. And I understand that. I mean, I felt that way about Elvis Presley.
Mm-hmm.
If I ever would have met Elvis Presley in person, which in a way I did, I drove right next to him when I was in my cop car. But that was a big thrill to me just to look over and see Elvis Presley,
Mm-hmm.
So I understand being a fan of somebody and thinking they're all great and wonderful. And I understand that. But there's a part of this investigation that's a story part,
Mm-hmm.
which I've done, which I've told in the case study manual and in the book that's online. We get into a lot of the details, the minutia, the things that aren't really relevant as far as evidence concerning this case that would be admissible in a court of law. But we know to get other people interested in this case, they need to know all these little details. They want to know all these details. So
Mm-hmm.
I deliberately wrote the case study manual, putting a lot of stuff in there that was totally out of the boundaries of, say, writing a police report to have somebody arrested or charged with a crime. I wrote it for young people and for a wide age group so that it would get attention, and of course I learned from doing that no matter how many details I put, I could write a book that was 5 feet tall, and there would still be questions. People would still have questions. And I understand that. I appreciate that. And I'm not critical of that. But I just will say it never even occurred to me because it doesn't matter to me regarding the evidence, whether he was wearing his ring or not.
Okay.
It might say something to a fan that, well, he took his ring off because he was leaving Courtney. I know that he was leaving Courtney. I can prove that he was leaving Courtney.
Right.
But
right.
whether he still had his ring on or not really wouldn't prove that one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
People take their wedding rings off for all kinds of different reasons.
That's
if they're
true.
cleaning their house or taking a shower, any number of things. Or some people never take it off. I understand that too.
Mm-hmm.
But it just wouldn't prove anything one way or the other to me.
All right, Tom, did Courtney ever try and, because someone mentioned this in my comment section, did Courtney ever try and pay you off to make you go away or something?
No, what she did when I wouldn't sign the confidentiality agreement, and so she knew, she could tell from that, and then actually on our drive to Carnation with Kat in the back seat, this was just a few days after Kurt's body was found when I went back up to Washington and we took the drive out there. I told her then that I was uncovering some things that I didn't know if she wanted to be uncovered or not. And having Kat there was really great because Kat was a total observer of this whole thing. She had nothing to do with anything other than to be a close friend of Courtney's. And she was in town. She came to Courtney's house because Kurt's body had been found. But she didn't think about anything other than suicide. But when Courtney said, yeah, Tom thinks there's something suspicious here and something else might have happened. And so I said, yeah, there's some things coming up. I don't know if you want uncovered or not, and
Mm-hmm.
Kat leaned forward real quick and she said, yeah, Tom, we want to know everything. And so Courtney really had no choice because Kat was there. And so Courtney had to follow up with that really quick and say, yeah, no, Tom, do whatever it takes, That's exactly what she said, do whatever it takes.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to use that phrase that she told me in front of Kat,
Mm-hmm.
do whatever it takes. And so I did a lot of things to do whatever it took.
Okay. And one more thing, the whole Kristen Pfaff situation, do you have an opinion on that? What you think might have happened to her or?
Yeah, I've always been highly suspicious of that. 2 months after Kurt died, and we know Courtney had already told me how jealous she was of Kristen before Kristen died even. And the exact same investigators handled her death as what handled Kurt's death. The same Sergeant Cameron was the homicide detective there. Dr. Hartshorn was the assistant medical examiner who was on the scene. The same authorities were there for Kristen's death. And I did read the police report on that. And there was some stuff about the position of Kristen's body that made me very suspicious. Now, I can't say, I could never take the time to do all the things on Kristen Taft's death that I've done on Kurt's death. So, but it's kind of a natural progression. If Kurt Cobain's death is ever reinvestigated, ever reopened, then just as a natural result of that, Kristen Taft's death will be too.
Okay.
So one takes care of the other. You know, there's really no need for me other than to express my suspicions. I did talk to people who were in the apartment the day and the night that Kristen died. In fact, Courtney was in the apartment earlier that day in Kristen's own apartment. Kristen was all packed up and ready to leave Seattle the next morning. She had a U-Haul trailer downstairs. So there's a lot of things I could go into that, just raise suspicions even higher. But the bottom line is, yeah, I'm suspicious and everybody should be suspicious of that. But when Kurt's case is taken care of, Kristen's will be taken care of just as a natural place in its order, you know?
And someone just asked, where is Rosemary Carroll now? How did that all end? Like, did she just not want to talk anymore, or what happened?
Yeah, you heard what she said when she asked if I was recording, right?
Right, in Soaked in Bleach, yes.
And you heard? Yeah. I mean, I hung up and we still talked for a little while, because if somebody tells me they don't want to record it, then I'm going to hang up and not record it.
Right.
Unless it was Courtney. I'm not going to lie to somebody and say, okay, I turned it off. But if I had a way of legitimately keeping it going with Courtney, I would. With Rosemary Carroll, I didn't really need a whole lot more from her. I had conversations with her that I recorded probably on 7 to 10 separate occasions, and there was a lot of information that was culled from those recordings that was extremely useful. So there wasn't a whole lot more that I needed from Rosemary Carroll.
Okay. Yeah, she did provide a lot, at least what I saw in the documentary, Soaked in Bleach. She did provide a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So do you want to do your video clips or your audio clips and make your points now, or you ready?
Yeah. Let me start off by saying, there are a lot of people. In fact, the original medical examiner in Seattle, this was Dr. Hartshorn's boss. He was interviewed by the media, and when they asked him the question about the tolerance level or whether it would have knocked Kurt out immediately or not, he said, well, it all depends on the person's tolerance level and how much they were used to taking and things like that. He kind of just, with his physical appearance, with the gestures he was making and the way he was just trying to dismiss the whole thing, it depends on their tolerance level. So that was just the first official thing from the Seattle authorities. And I get asked this all the time too, and people will post this on the internet that don't like me. They'll say, oh, he can't say that. It depends on the person's tolerance level. Even Nick Broomfield said that to me in the film Kurt and Courtney. And he said, well, but didn't he have a really high tolerance level? And I made the comment, well, Nick, you show me somebody that says they can fly and have them stand on top of a roof and flap their arms. And if I see them flying, then I'll believe it. Okay. But I'm not going to believe this unless I see a similar case. So that's the big thing here. People will say, well, it depends on his tolerance level, and he was really a heavy heroin user. So let me play you. Well, I was going to play you a couple of tapes, just really quick pieces about Billy Corgan.
Okay.
If you want to hear those,
I would love to.
they're cuts with. I don't believe I've ever released these to the public, so this is kind of a one-time or first-time special just for you.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. They don't have a whole lot of meaning other than, we've said that Courtney, was sleeping with Billy Corgan within 3 weeks after Kurt's death. Okay, here's the first one. This one is a 40-second cut.
Kelly was like calling, and and I was taking it because I thought he was like, as a friend. And then I'm all vulnerable and whatever. And he goes, man, like, don't talk about her being jealous and like doing this whole seduction thing and, like beating me to New York and lying to his wife that he's going to New York to fix something, to tell me that he's decided he's in love with me again and just like fucking toying with me. And it's like, okay, that's my business. So, the media can't do anything about that. That's my problem.
Okay, so you heard her say, that's my business with Billy.
Mm-hmm.
The media can't do anything about it. So okay, the next one here, this is 31 seconds.
And it's really fucking with my life. It's fucking with my daughter. She sees Billy as bad, and like her dad's bad. Not her dad's bad, but, she sees a man and dad with her mom. I never saw her. She's only 3 years old. She threw herself on the floor and like flipped out. I was just like, this is it. She's never going to see this again. That's her dad, and her dad can be there. And until, I'm ready.
Now, the reason she's telling me this stuff is because I think she understood. She didn't know exactly what I wasn't investigating or looking into or doing surveillance on.
Mm-hmm.
That it's always better to tell me about this stuff before I find out about it.
Right.
Okay, here's the third one. Now, this one's kind of long. Is the audio coming through clear enough?
It's a little hard to understand. It's loud enough. It's just a little hard to understand.
Okay, I'll turn the volume down a little bit. That may help.
Okay.
Since it was recorded on a telephone recorder, it has its faults, and
Right.
A lot of the recordings I made didn't come out very clear. I can understand them listening to them and re-listening to them, but to hear them for the first time, it might be a little difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's the last one. Now, this is going to be 2 minutes and 14 seconds. Do you want it to go that long?
Sure. Whatever you want to give.
Okay. All right.
Thing is this, I just didn't want this. It's coming out. I know it's going to come out. And I want it to come out in a way where at least the reporters can prove that it happened, rather than it being suggested that it happened after Kurt's death. There's nothing tangible before that. I did not set eyes on the guy except in London. Ironically, the night before Kurt did the suicide roam thing, and at that point, I was with Hallie, I was with my baby, and I was with a friend of mine who's a British writer. And we passed each other in the hallway of a hotel. I was checking out, he was checking in. Other than that, I had to be Tokyo when I was with my husband, and I couldn't even look him in the eyes because I was so embarrassed. I sure hated him so much. So there's no physical evidence to prove that we were anywhere near each other, and that's what I'm afraid the plan of the British tabloids would be that, like, that me and Billy were having some kind of affair, which, I mean, come on. But it was just like, Kurt was barely dead, and Billy was, like, calling, and I was taking it because I thought he was, like, as a friend. And then I'm all vulnerable and whatever, and he comes back, like, don't talk about Kurt being jealous, and, like,
Okay, you heard that part in the last one. I didn't realize it was in the same one, but you heard that last section where he came to Canyon Ranch already.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll go to the next one. Now, this one is about using Francis's money. This is when we were doing surveillance on Trent Reznor, and she mentions right at the end of this thing, it's 22 seconds, and right at the end, she mentions that she's using Francis's money to do this.
Okay.
That would have to be the plane. What I'm saying is just 3, 4 hours. He does that a lot and get up and go work.
So you'd rather have Chris go check into the hotel right away?
Yeah. Because it is a lot of money and it's Francis money.
Were you able to pick that up?
Yeah, I heard that last. She said it's a lot of money, and it was Francis's money.
Yeah. So she was paying me, and it was a lot of money for the,
Tom, could you turn your voice up, or did you lower your phone or something?
Oh, just now when I'm talking?
There you go. You're back to normal now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I don't think I did anything. I should have probably lowered the volume a little bit in her playback, because when she talks, it comes out really loud because
Yeah.
of the telephone. So I hope you guys can understand what's being said here.
Tom, now your voice is low again. Are you covering the earpiece or something? There you go. You're loud again.
Wow. Yeah, I must be. I'm holding it in my hand right now. So
You're good now.
okay, yeah. Let me know when that happens, and I'll move my hand.
Okay. Someone just asked, can you just summarize those 4 clips or those few clips quickly?
Well, I would, except for I just took them off the screen to get them out of my way.
Okay. So basically, she was talking about a possible relationship with Billy, and she was also talking about how Trent Reznor sleeps 4 hours sometimes, and that
yeah, her affair with Trent Reznor really made the news. She wanted it to.
Okay.
If you heard that in there, she talks a lot about whatever she's doing. She likes to have it covered in the media. She just wants it covered in her way, and she wants people to only know what she wants them to know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot about what she talks about. You might have picked up on a little bit of that there, but she wasn't shy about her affair with Trent Reznor. By that time, I think Kurt had been dead almost a year, maybe 9 months or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And she was trying to stay really relevant with her album out there and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more she could get herself in the news, and this was Courtney's, what she always did. Every month or so, she'd find something that would get her in the news. Like when she claimed she lost their wedding ring once.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that made the news, the tabloid news. And I watched that on a regular basis for years. A certain period of time would go by and Courtney'd be thinking, I haven't been in the news lately. I got to do something.
Mm.
So she'd do something crazy to get herself in the news. And it was all just to keep herself relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, I have this one titled Death Timeline Dispute.
I want to know where he was.
Okay. I don't know if this is worth playing because it's 4 minutes and 43 seconds. It'd be pretty long.
Mm-hmm.
Let me get a better idea.
You want a polygraph to see if he's telling the truth.
Yeah. Okay, this is when we talked in January of 1995.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about the polygraph for Callie and all that. Now, this one is really important, this one coming up.
Okay.
Courtney has always said that the Rome incident was a suicide attempt.
Mm-hmm.
She never said that until after Kurt was found dead in Seattle.
Okay.
She had plenty of time to tell everybody, he tried to kill himself in Rome. No,
Right.
It was always, the media always reported that as an accidental overdose.
Mm-hmm.
Once Kurt was dead, then Courtney was telling everybody he tried to kill himself.
Mm-hmm.
That was a suicide attempt. So this is basically through Courtney's lips. This is Kurt's words through Courtney's own mouth.
Mm-hmm.
See if that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, here we go.
Cheryl, I fell asleep. I was real tired, and he got really depressed because he hadn't seen me in a month. And I tweeted videos of Steve LA Bay and the New York City Beat glamorous. He he'd been playing like Slavonia, right? And he got real depressed, and he wrote basically a suicide note. There's no real other way. He was leaving me, but he obviously wasn't leaving me. He was, I will always watch out for you. I will always love you. Take care of Francis. I mean, so on and so forth. And it was scribbled there tightly. He was obviously completely incoherent. Well, I could have had it committed. All right? And I would, he wrote basically a suicide note. There's no real other way. He was leaving me.
Okay, that's the part I really wanted you to hear. She's calling it a suicide note, but she says he claims he was leaving me.
Right.
So Kurt's own words were, I'm leaving you. I'm not committing suicide. I'm leaving you. That's, Courtney proves that was not a suicide attempt in Rome. And of course, he comes back and hangs out with his best friend, Dylan. And if Dylan thought that was a suicide attempt in Rome, why is Dylan telling me Kurt's not suicidal? There's no way he'd commit suicide. In fact, we were talking earlier. Are my hands in the right position right now?
Yeah, you're good. I can hear you fine.
Okay. We kind of got off of it, but we were talking earlier about Dylan Carlson's role in this, and a lot of people are suspicious of him, especially after they saw the film Kurt and Courtney, and he looked real seedy and everything. First of all, if he was involved with this is just kind of common sense, and a police detective would have felt the same way about this. If he was involved in this, if he even knew that Kurt was being set up and was going to be dead, he certainly wouldn't have had this response. And one of the first things I asked him when we were sitting in the restaurant, and I asked him a few more times while we were driving in the car, I would say, is Kurt suicidal? Courtney keeps saying he's suicidal. And Dylan was so adamant about that. No, he's not suicidal, not at all. Like that was a silly thing for me to even ask him. Well, listen, if Dylan was involved in this thing, his answer would have been, yeah, I'm really worried about him. He's been really down. I'm really concerned. Right. That's the way he would have answered if he had any involvement in this. So, and there were other things, but that's the main thing right there. There's no way Dylan was involved or knew about this. But once I do believe, I've mentioned this in the case study manual, I do believe that Dylan probably saw his body up there when I sent him up to the house alone, and it took so long for him to come back. I think he might have seen the greenhouse, looked in there, because he knew it was there. I didn't know it was there. But he looked in there and probably saw Kurt's body in there. And then the next morning, when we're on our way to Carnation and we hear on the radio that a body was found at the Carnation property, Dylan had no response at all. He was just deadpan, whereas, being your best friend and everything, you go, oh, I wonder if that's Kurt. Oh, no, what's going on here? Whatever. He just didn't say anything unless I asked him something. And then it was just a deadpan response like, yeah, he's not surprised. And he wouldn't be surprised because he just saw the body the night before.
Right. The thing that fascinates me about Dylan is it seems like he was beholden to Courtney, but yet it's almost like he despised that whole relationship he had with Courtney and told you some things that were true about Kurt. Like you said, when Dylan said that Kurt wasn't suicidal or isn't suicidal, because in my opinion, most of the people that were at Kurt's house and Dylan as well, they all kind of seem like heroin minions of Courtney. But it almost seems like Dylan kind of despised Courtney still, and that's why he told you some true things about Kurt, but in the end he was still beholden to Courtney, for his drugs and drug money and stuff like that.
Well, let me tell you, he did despise Courtney. In fact, there were a couple of times when we were talking in the car, and he'd just say, "I don't know why he married her. You know, all they do is fight all the time."
Wow.
And she hates the band. Now, I know that for a fact because she told me that too. She doesn't like anybody else in the band other than Pat Smear, who she helped get in the band. But Dave and Chris, she didn't like them at all, and she didn't care whether I knew it. You know, I mean, she said Kurt's the only one that has any talent in that band. The other guys, they make all that money and they don't have any talent.
Oh,
you know?
That's messed up.
We've read stories about that too. I have over the years about the friction between Courtney and especially Dave Grohl and Chris also, but especially Dave Grohl. And Dave Grohl, obviously, besides Kurt, was the most talented in that band, you know. And I think Courtney was afraid that at one point, you know, he might be more of a front man and kind of be competing with Kurt. I mean, Kurt, I'm sure, was a generous person, and he would have let Dave get more involved in the singing and performing and everything, you know. But basically, Courtney wanted Kurt to be making like 90% of the money and the other two making 10%, you know. But no, she didn't like, Dylan didn't like Courtney. It was obvious from the things that he said about her. But after Kurt was gone, remember, Dylan was a non-working heroin addict. Right. He didn't have a job. He lived with his mother in her apartment. Okay. And he had no way of getting heroin without somebody with deep pockets. And once Kurt was gone, he had to immediately rely on Courtney. And Courtney, at the same time, had to rely on Dylan not telling me too many things. Right. That's why when I was waiting at the house for Dylan to show up, I never knew he arrived until I came out of the kitchen. I'd been sitting in the kitchen with Frances in her high chair and stuff, and a couple other people that were in there. And then I finally came out and I said, "Has anybody seen Dylan yet?" And they said, "Yeah, he's upstairs talking to Courtney." So before allowing Dylan to talk to me, Courtney has to have a little session with him upstairs. And then when he comes downstairs, he's higher than a kite. He'd just been shot up with heroin. He could hardly stand up. Right. So she gets him all high on heroin and sends him down to talk to me after, I'm sure, telling him not to say certain things to me. And he still wouldn't have a clue, you know. Right. I don't know that he necessarily, even at that time, suspected Courtney of anything, but he knew that he was dependent on her to get enough money to get heroin. Right. Yeah, that definitely came through in the documentary. His, like I said, a lot of the people at Kurt's house during the time he was gone, they just sound like a bunch of kind of heroin minions to me, subservient to Courtney. Yeah. Well, let's get to the last audio cuts that I have here, and let me start by explaining. This is an interview that was done on moxnews.com, is K5 Cairo Television 5 in Seattle. Okay. And it starts off. The introduction here will just be the introduction of the news person saying what they're going to be who they're going to be talking to. So this will just be a 15-second cut. Okay.
Detective Mike Szynski was not long into the job when he was assigned to investigate the death of Kurt Cobain in 1994. Now, with the 20-year anniversary coming up, he went back to take another look at the case file, expecting many questions.
Did that come through okay?
Perfect.
Okay. So that's just introducing, showing that this is a television station. The photograph, the picture I have of the video actually shows the newsmen there with their cameras and Detective Mike Szynski sitting in a chair getting ready to be interviewed. So here's the first part of first cut that I made that's important.
Well, what I believe happened was that Kurt went up there for one purpose, was to commit suicide.
and I believe he did not want to be found and be revived, or so he wanted to make a sure way to kill himself. And I believe Kurt went upstairs, and I believe he may have been under some narcotics at the time. I think he came back up to the greenery, finished off his note, walked, set it up on top of the pottery of some potting soil, and when he was done with it, he took his pen and plunged the pen, paled pen right through the center of the note into the potting soil. He walked back and sat down. He already had the shotgun out. He loaded the shotgun. I believe then he took his heroin and injected himself with 1 or 2 syringes, and put the tops, the little orange tops that covered the needle on the syringe, put those away, and then took the fateful shot and killed himself.
Okay, so you notice there that he talked about loading the shotgun after writing a suicide note.
Mm-hmm.
He sits down and loads a shotgun with 3 shells.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody, we all know, and in the police reports, that shotgun was loaded with 3 shells. So the obvious question that this detective should have been asking himself was, gee, I wonder why he put 3 shells in there. What was he going to do with the other 2 shells?
Mm-hmm.
You know? And also, this is all speculative on his part, saying how he walked over, he did this, then he sat down, then he did it. There's no way he has of knowing this. Of course, he did say, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
but he doesn't say the evidence indicates. What I believe is that he read the Charles Cross book, Heavier Than Heaven, and that's where he got a lot of his material from, because some of the stuff, and some of it that I'm not even playing here right now, sounds exactly like what Charles Cross wrote,
Mm-hmm.
which was all just imaginary speculation, you know, as if he was a psychic and he could see and he knew exactly what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
So the next one, now this has to do with whether this was a fatal dose of heroin or not, whether this heroin would have killed him or not,
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, they've been talking all these years about it depends on his tolerance level. Well, now we've got a Seattle police detective that's been assigned to review all of the police reports, to go to the medical examiner's office, to look into all of this stuff, and to report back, and not only to report back to his superior, but to do an interview on television, which is something you're never allowed to do unless you have permission from somebody very high up in the department.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a deputy sheriff, I was not allowed to talk to the media about anything unless I got permission from somebody way high up in the department, like from the downtown office, from the media people, which would have been a captain or somebody down there in charge of the media.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to be responsible to their superiors also if they allow something like this to go on and the person does a bad job of it. So this person better be accurate. He better know what he's talking about, or head's going to roll.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's the way it is. So listen to the next thing he says here.
Okay.
So it's obvious to me that he did not want to survive. He killed himself because of the shotgun blast, but the heroin would have did the trick also.
Okay. You heard that. The heroin would have did the trick also.
Yes.
Now the next one's even more direct than that. The reason it takes a second for me to get it going is because I have to push a play button on here rather than just click on the icon. So here we go.
So I believe he gave himself a fatal dose of black tar heroin.
I believe he gave himself a fatal dose of black tar heroin. So there's no argument there anymore now about Kurt, whether it was a fatal dose or not, or whether he could tolerate it.
Mm-hmm.
You got that?
Mm-hmm.
So the real question now is, how long would it last until he could? I'm trying to manipulate my screen here to get up the rest of the stuff. Okay. Now listen to this. He goes to the medical examiner's office and listen to what he has to say about that little trip.
Okay.
I asked the King County Medical Examiner's Office some questions that I don't think were addressed earlier in the initial investigation. One was, the amount of heroin that Kurt ingested, that he gave himself, was extreme amount of heroin. I don't think they've seen anybody with an overdose in our county, at least, that had that much of heroin inside of them.
Can you believe that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are you kidding me? The medical examiner's office says that they've never even seen anybody, even with an overdose, that died, that had that much heroin in them.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they just wrote this thing off as a suicide almost immediately. I mean, the odds right there, that thing that he just said right there, make the odds like 1 in 5,000 or 10,000 or however many heroin overdoses they've had in that county over the last 20 or 30 years. It makes the odds of this being a suicide astronomical.
Right.
And this is coming right from the Seattle Police Department. Okay. The other ones I have, and I don't know whether we'll take the time to play them or not. They're taken from the film Soaked in Bleach, and it's better just to watch that. It has to do with toxicology, and it's basically repeating the same things that the Seattle detective repeated.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Wett talks about how he's supervised over 38,000 autopsies. I mean, he's one of the best known and most respected forensic pathologists in the whole country.
Right.
He's on Dr. Phil.
Cyril Wett.
That's how Dr. Phil introduced him. Yeah, Cyril Wett.
Right.
And he's in the film, and he's saying this whole thing doesn't make sense. He's never seen anything like this before.
Mm-hmm.
But, you can watch the film to see all that. The main thing I wanted to get across here is these statements are coming right from the Seattle Police Department, and this detective doesn't even realize what he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
On the one side, he's saying it was a suicide, but on the other hand, what he's saying makes it impossible that it was a suicide.
Right. If you take such a large dose of heroin, it would hit you immediately, and there's no way you could then load a shotgun, cap the needles, shoot yourself. The dose is so high, you'd just be out instantly, basically, is what you're saying? Exactly.
And the only, these people that say, well, it depends on the tolerance level. Look, your argument isn't with me. I just got an email like that this morning, in fact. And, your argument isn't with me about that. Talk to the Seattle Police Department. They said it was a fatal dose of black tar heroin.
Mm-hmm.
They said the heroin would have did the trick also. It would have killed him also. So, there's no more of this, well, it depends on his tolerance level. Mm-hmm. No, these guys investigated this thoroughly. In 2014 is when they did this. Mm-hmm. And because it was going to be an anniversary, they knew there was going to be a lot of publicity about it. So they had this guy go back into the case, look at it completely, talk to the medical examiner's office and all that. And then he comes up with this stuff and doesn't even realize what he's saying, that he's saying that Kurt Cobain could not have committed suicide.
Right. And you say the medical examiner said they've never seen levels of heroin that high in anyone?
Not in their county. Yeah.
Not in their county. Okay.
Yeah. King County is a big county, by the way. Mm-hmm. They're the ones that are having trouble with the coronavirus right now, King County. It's almost on total lockdown.
Wow. And so basically those two statements right there sum up the whole thing, that it's just, it would have been impossible for Kurt to load and grab a shotgun and shoot himself after taking that much heroin. Even a hardcore addict. It was obscenely above what a hardcore addict could even handle.
Exactly. He's calling it an extreme amount of heroin. One of these clips, I don't recall playing it. I might have lost it. I brought this over into Microsoft Word and brought all these videos over too, so that when I scroll the page, I didn't realize it would do this, but the videos kind of move about a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But there was one of these where Szynski, and maybe we heard it, and I don't recall hearing it. You'll remember probably, but there was one of these where he said he took something like, 11 times the amount of heroin that even a hardcore heroin addict could take. So he's not even just saying that he took a lot more heroin than what most people take.
Mm-hmm.
He said 11 times the amount of heroin that even a hardcore heroin addict could
Mm-hmm.
survive.
I mean, the levels are just so astounding. I can't
So
see.
the point I'm trying to make here is when it comes down to evidence and reopening this case, I can't call up CBS or 48 Hours or anything. You don't get a lot of action from media when you make the phone call.
Mm-hmm.
When they call me, they treat me like a king.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody in the media calls me and they want an interview or they want whatever from me, they just talk so nice. And in the very beginning, when I tried to get somebody to help back me up on some of this stuff, it's like, yeah, I'm sorry, I just talked to the editor. We're not interested. Just totally bad attitude. So I learned right away. People would write to me and say, "Oh, you ought to give this case to 48 Hours, or you ought to give this case to whatever TV show. You ought to contact this person or that person." It doesn't work that way. You got to wait till they contact you, and then
Right.
you've got their attention.
Right. I totally understand that concept. Is there any other points you'd like to make, Tom?
No, just if you have any other questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Okay.
It's 4:00 now, I think.
We could take a few more. We're about an hour, 46 minutes in. Maybe a couple more questions would be cool. Anybody? Jennifer Shank. I don't know who that is. Yes.
Yeah, let's see. There's two Jennifers, and I'm trying to. Oh, Jennifer Shank was one of the girls that was in the room, and I'm pretty sure about this. I'm remembering back a long ways now, but I think she was the one in the room with her boyfriend. It actually shows them soaked in bleach, a guy and a girl sitting on a couch.
Oh.
I think they're even making out or something.
Okay.
There was a guy and girl in there sitting on the couch. I couldn't tell whether they were boyfriend and girlfriend, but I'm pretty sure it was Jennifer Shank was the girl that was in there.
Okay. A lot of people have asked.
And they were in there when they were in there.
Go ahead.
What?
Go ahead, Tom.
I was just going to say they were in there. They were in there when Eric came in and Courtney started screaming at him too.
Okay. A lot of people are asking about the El Duce character. Do you have anything you'd like to say about that?
Yeah. I met him in person. Hard Copy was going to do an episode on this, and I tried to avoid Hard Copy for a long time because they were considered a tabloid TV show and everything. And but eventually, it got to the point where it was fine to do a show like that. And so I was working with Diane Diamond, if anybody remembers who she was, but she was one of the main female leads on Hard Copy. And she was the one I was working with. We had lunch together with her producer. The three of us had lunch at a restaurant near my office and discussed everything. And they were both really nice to me, and, sounded like everything was going real well. What I did say, though, is I said, before I'll get involved with any television thing with this El Duce character, I want a police report made to the Seattle Police Department, or to LA Police Department, because that's where it allegedly happened, where Courtney got out of the car and approached him and offered to pay him $50,000. So I want to see a police report on that, and I want El Duce to pass a polygraph or to take a polygraph test. And so Hard Copy paid for that, and they had the polygraph taken. And then I went and sat with Dr. Gelb, the guy that polygraphed him. He's also the guy that polygraphed O.J. Simpson. And Dr. Gelb told me that El Duce, Eldon Hoke is his real name, passed the polygraph. And I said, is there any way he could have tricked the machine or done something to throw it off? And he just kind of laughed. He said, no, not this guy. Now, Dr. Gelb has been around for years. I saw him and his partner do a TV show when I was a kid. I think they had a TV show called Liar, where people would tell their stories and then they'd give them a polygraph. In fact, F. Lee Bailey was his partner on that TV show. And so he's been around for a long time, done thousands of polygraphs. Nobody was known to have done more polygraphs than him. So when he says, and he had the most modern equipment too, and when he says this guy could not have faked the polygraph or tricked it or anything, but he did pass with a 98.6% probability that he was telling the truth about the incident with Courtney getting out of the car. And when I heard about it too, it did fit Courtney's MO. She doesn't drive herself. She always takes limos, at that point anyhow. She always took a limo everywhere she went. So for him to describe her getting out of this limo and running up to her, and saying what he said, it sounded just like the Courtney Love I knew, So, but still, I'm not going to just accept a story like that unless it's really vetted, And I'm not going to go on TV with some guy like that unless he's been vetted, like I said.
Right.
So he passed the polygraph. And his story made sense. And I did go up to the rock shop and I saw where everything happened. And so I decided, okay, I'll do the Hard Copy show. And I said, the only thing is I want to be the last person to be interviewed. And before my interview, I want to be sure that there are promos for a couple of days before the show airs. Mm-hmm. And my reason for that is so that they wouldn't just do the whole thing and do my interview and then put it in the can and put it on the shelf in case something happened in the future. And then they pull it off and they have this exclusive thing, and I'm not going to waste my time with people that aren't going to air what they tell me they're going to air.
Right.
So that was in the agreement from the beginning. When we first met at the restaurant, they agreed to that. And then as we were going through the interviews, I was with Eldon Hoke when Diane was interviewing him. I was in the room watching that whole thing. The other guy that worked in the rock shop, he was allegedly overheard this too. So she interviewed him, and after he left the room, I told Diane, I said, I think he's lying. I think they all polygraphed him also and said he was on drugs when he came in. So they couldn't get an accurate test on him. But I think he was just trying to get in on the publicity.
Okay.
So things were progressing along on a daily basis. They were doing more and more. And I would usually go down to the studio. They were doing it at Paramount. And I would go and watch what they were doing that day. And I kept asking, because the day came where they were supposed to show the first promo. And they used to show promos for upcoming shows all the time. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't asking for anything unusual. And so when the night came that the promo was supposed to start airing, it didn't air. So the next day when I went into the studio, I asked Diane, why the promo didn't air. And she said, I don't know. It didn't air. And she runs off. She comes back. She says, oh, yeah, they screwed up. It'll air tonight, Tom. So the next morning was the morning I was supposed to show up for my interview. And it didn't air that night like Diane told me. Okay. So I called the show the next day and told them I wasn't coming in because the promo didn't air. And within a few minutes, I get a call from Diane Diamond, and she seemed like such a sweet lady on TV, but she was so angry and she was cussing at me. Every other word was the F word. And what's going on, Tom? What are you up to? Something's wrong here. Something's just not right. Why won't you do this? And I said, Diane, don't get mad at me. You guys didn't come through with what you promised me. You know, it was your part. It was your agreement. It was our agreement that you failed to come through with. So don't get mad at me. And so nothing ever came of that. And nothing ever aired because they felt I said, you know, go ahead and do your show and do whatever you want. And for my part, you can use what I've written in the case study manual. You can quote me, you can show pictures of me or whatever you want, but I'm not going to come in and waste my time doing an interview for something you're just going to put on the shelf. Mm-hmm. And, you know, she cussed at me some more. And she said, we can't do this without you, and hung up. And that was the end of that.
Okay. So someone's mentioning this name, Alan Wrench. Do you know anything about this person?
Oh, please. Yeah. I had communicated with him by email for quite a long time. And then around a little bit before 2004, Ian Halpern and Max Wallace. Max was in the film Soaked in Bleach. But Ian and Max wrote the book Love and Death, mm-hmm. which was very popular. It still sells very well on Amazon. And we had discussed, they spent like 2 weeks with me where I lived at that time. And we had discussed this whole Alan Wrench thing. And I said, oh, this guy's just a phony. Every time there's a high profile case, people come forward and they'll say, I'm the one, I killed her, you know, whatever. Mm-hmm. They just do it to get attention. Mm-hmm. And they know that the police are going to let them go because they won't be able to get solid proof. But meanwhile, the media will be there saying, oh, the police have a suspect. And there'll be people trying to get a picture of the guy going in and out of the police station or the jail or whatever, you know. Mm-hmm. There are people out there that are just so craved for attention that they do stuff like that. And it always happens. And Alan Wrench, I had so many emails going back and forth from him. They were fairly serious. I mean, I was taking it serious only to the extent that I didn't know what this guy was up to. Mm-hmm. And he seemed to be just picking my brain, trying to find out what I knew and how I knew it and all that stuff. And yet he would never answer anything about himself. And then after they put him in the book, he contacted them, I guess, when he found out they were working on a book, and they put him in the book. They did say in the book that they don't really believe necessarily that he had anything to do with it, but that was just kind of a footnote at the very end of the book, of the bit. And so when we went to New York on our media tour in 2004, we spent like 10 days in New York, just going from one radio station to a television show to, you know, Dateline, to the morning show, to the Today Show, all of that in about 10 days. And that whole time, I'm having to argue with these guys. Why did you put that in the book? Why did you do that? I told you this guy was a phony. I told you that. Why did you put that? Now I'm going to have to live with it. And Ian, who I've kind of dropped out of friendship with him because of the things that he's done. And I've just told him, just leave me alone. The other guy, Max, who was in the film, I'm still good friends with him. I like him a lot. But Ian was the one, he told me that the publishers wanted the story about Alan Wrench put in the book. What I've learned of Ian now, from experience, I don't believe that for a second. I think he wanted it in there. And I've had to live with it. And no matter how many times I tell people that Alan Wrench is a total phony and he's a hoax and he doesn't think Courtney had anything to do with this, he'll say that a lot of times if you're in any kind of communication with him. Mm-hmm. He's a fan of Courtney Love's, in fact, but yet he's trying to pull this little stunt off where, you know, for a second he'll get people believing that he's the one that did it. And so I get these emails. I mean, I get them every week, at least up to this week, where somebody will write and say, hey, Tom, you got to call me. I found out who who killed Kurt Cobain. It's this guy named Alan Wrench. Call me and I'll tell you more about it. You know, and this has been going on since 2004. And I mean, fortunately for Ian, he lives in Canada, because if he ever came within arm's reach of me, I think I'd wring his neck. not literally, but I'd sure tell him, thanks a lot, buddy.
I know, right? We get what you mean, Tom. We get what you mean.
Anyhow, that's my feelings about what?
We understand what you mean.
Over each other.
We understand what you mean. We know you don't want to hurt the guy. We get it.
Yeah.
We get it. How about we end?
I mean,
Go ahead, Tom.
you're breaking.
Go ahead, Tom. What were you going to say?
Or either that, or I might have put my hand where it didn't belong or something. But
Okay.
you were starting to say something, and then you apparently thought I was talking.
No, I thought you were about to say
Go
something.
ahead.
No, I was just going to say, maybe we should end with someone asked the question, the practice sheet that you got from Rosemary Carroll. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, I'll just say that Courtney had gone over after she left the Peninsula Hotel. She went over to Rosemary's house, which is in LA in the Larchmont district, and really nice, big, fancy house. And Courtney stayed there, I guess, for several days after she left the Peninsula Hotel. And even after she stayed there for a while, and after she took all of her stuff and left, she would still keep going back over there, because that's where Danny Goldberg lived too. Danny Goldberg was the manager for Nirvana, and Danny Goldberg publicly was sticking up for Courtney. In fact, he made a statement publicly. He said if it wasn't for Courtney, he probably would have done this many years ago. And when I asked Rosemary about that, I said, I just heard Danny make this statement. If it wasn't for Courtney, Kurt would have killed himself several years ago. And Rosemary said, Tom, that's just what he says publicly. So anyhow, Danny Goldberg was Rosemary Carroll's wife or husband, but he was out of town. He was in New York when Rosemary was having me come over to the house and stuff. And the first time I went over to the house, she told me to come over because there was something there she wanted to show me. And it turned out to be Courtney had left her backpack there. And Rosemary gave me the phone records from the Peninsula Hotel that she got out of Courtney's backpack. And that would have been impossible for me to come by. So that was a treasure right there, having the complete phone records from Courtney's hotel room. And then she pulled out this one-page of practice handwriting, which everybody's pretty much seen by now, I think. And she pulled out a torn off piece of paper off the bottom of a notepad that said, "Get arrested." And we all know that on Thursday night, Courtney Love got arrested. And this note would have come from right around that period before she got arrested. So she made a note to herself, "Get arrested." And that she was trying to get the body discovered. She was surprised that we didn't discover the body the first night we were there. And I've explained to everybody, and the guys that wrote the book, they did back me up on this. They went up there too to the house, and they drove up the driveway when it was raining really hard at night, and that big spotlight shining right on your windshield. And in my case, all the lights were on in the house off to my right.
Okay.
And if there's a guy walking around in there with a shotgun, that's where my attention is going to be.
Right.
So I didn't see the greenhouse. Dylan didn't tell me about the greenhouse until we heard about it later on. And but the police, it turns out there were actually 5 different people that were up there during the daytime after Kurt was already dead that didn't find him. The police went up there on 2 separate occasions. One time it was 2 police officers, another time it was 1 officer. And there were people working on the property that were there that the police in their report said that they spoke to. And then there was Callie and Jessica Hopper, who were staying at the house at the time. and they were still there, coming and going after Kurt was already dead up there.
Mm-hmm.
So now Callie split on Thursday. He left town and went to LA, and he knew I was looking for him. So I forget your original question here, but
we started off with the practice sheet, and you kind of
okay,
went from there.
That was found in that backpack that Rosemary opened up and pulled out anything that she thought I'd be interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure when Courtney found out about that later, she got really angry. But knowing then, by the time she got angry, she would have known that Rosemary had been in communication with me.
Mm-hmm.
So she had to treat Rosemary with kid gloves too.
Right.
You know, she knew if Rosemary was going to tell me the things that she told me and be in contact with me like that without telling Courtney, then she didn't know what Rosemary would be capable of.
Mm-hmm.
And she couldn't have anything happen to Rosemary, first of all, because she was married to Danny Goldberg.
Mm-hmm.
And second of all, because she knew that Rosemary and I had been talking a lot. So if something would have happened to Rosemary, that would have made the news too, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm amazed the information that Rosemary gave. That is some priceless information, and I'm so glad she wasn't afraid to at least tell you those things and show you the practice sheet. I'm just so glad she spoke up.
Yeah. Well, and it was supposed to be confidential between her and I.
Mm-hmm.
That was the agreement. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Tom, I need to talk to you, but you have to promise me you won't, you know, this is just between you and I.
Right.
And I kept my agreement
Mm-hmm.
until a few years later, when Rosemary said something in a public interview and referred to Kurt's death as a suicide.
Okay.
You know, when Kurt killed himself or whatever. And so okay, if you're going to go in that direction when you've already told me, you know, that you don't believe he wrote that letter, that you believe the letter was culled together with something else and that he wasn't suicidal and all that, and now you're feeling the pressure where you've got to, I know her husband and Courtney pressured her into doing some kind of an interview where she referred to Kurt's death as a suicide.
Right.
So if she's going to do that, then that voids our agreement as far as I was concerned. And that's the only time I finally opened up and let the voice recordings out to the public.
Well, even though she was, you know, under the assumption that it was a confidential setting, she still could have kept those secrets. And I'm just glad she at least told you those things, because those pieces of information and that practice sheet are just invaluable to all of us and you, in my opinion, understanding what really happened.
Yeah. Well, again, just like the Seattle police have made it clear without even realizing it, I think in Rosemary's case, she realized what she was saying when she was talking to me,
Mm-hmm.
but there's no way she believed that Kurt committed suicide.
Right.
You know, by starting right off by saying, Tom, Kurt wasn't suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't suicidal. I mean, Courtney's telling me everybody knows he's going to kill himself. You know,
Mm-hmm.
everybody but his attorney, who he talks to on a regular basis and goes to dinner and lunch with, and they both, you know, they knew each other really well for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then by her telling me that she thinks somebody else wrote the note, a lot of that I disagreed with her, other than the bottom lines on the note. I think Kurt did write the body of the note. And so I disagreed with her about that. But just the very fact that she said she thinks somebody else pieced that note together,
Mm-hmm.
well, there's no explanation for that other than he had to have been murdered.
Right.
Why would anybody bother piecing a suicide note together if he was committing suicide himself?
Mm-hmm.
You know? And by the way, most suicide notes that I've seen are very short and simple. Now, that doesn't mean that none of them are long, but usually they're just a few lines like, I'm sorry, honey. And I've been involved in a lot of suicide cases, I'll tell you.
Mm-hmm.
And most of them, first of all, most of them don't even leave notes.
Okay.
But when they do leave notes, about a third, I believe, is the percentage, about 30%.
Okay.
When they do leave notes, they're usually very short. And the ones that I've seen are just maybe 3 or 4 lines, you
Okay.
know. I'm sorry. I know you understand why I feel I have to do this. I'm sorry to leave you like this. I love you and I don't mean to hurt you or whatever, you know, and that's the end of it. But that whole big long thing, I mean, there's no doubt when you read the body of that note, he was talking to his fans. There's no doubt about that. Nobody can question that.
Right. I agree. Okay, Tom, it's 2 hours and 10 minutes. I don't want to keep you any longer. So I think we should probably end it here. I just want to say, on behalf of my viewers and myself, just thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate your time. We have enormous respect for you. And we all just want to thank you for the work you did on the Cobain case and trying to show the world the truth of what really happened to Kurt Cobain. You've done brilliant work, and we are all grateful to you. And we're grateful to you for doing this interview, volunteering. You know, it was your idea to do it. I and my fans, or not my fans, excuse me, my viewers are so appreciative. Thank you so much, Tom.
Well, you know, somebody referred me to you and told me to look at your podcast, and I watched for a while. I thought, you know, this is the type of guy I want to talk to.
Well, thank you.
I don't care if it's a major media outlet or KNBC or anything. You're the type of person I want to talk to.
Well, thank you.
And that's why I'm doing it. So that's to your credit. I also want to mention, by the way, I have listened to a lot of the stuff you've talked about on Chris Cornell. Obviously, and I mentioned this to you, I can't get involved in that, and I have no interest in it myself personally. But I've listened to you enough to know that you're not a conspiracy theorist. You're not just making stuff up or because you think you want to believe that he could not have committed suicide or whatever. I've listened to enough of it to know that you're legitimate.
Thank you.
I can't give you any answers or anything, and I can't take the time to look into it. But when I hear you talking about it, I'm not listening to a crazy conspiracy theorist.
Well, that means a lot coming from you. I really appreciate you saying that, Tom. Thank you so much.
No problem. You guys have a great day today, everybody that's listening, and you, Nick, I appreciate talking to you, and I'm glad we got this done.
Me too, Tom. It was great. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Okay, you too.
All right, Tom.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay. That concludes our interview for today. I think it went great. And what I forgot to say to Tom, if he's still watching, anytime you want to do it again, of course, I'd be willing to do it again. I also want to thank, now that the call's ended, I want to thank the person who allowed me to do the interview here. I'm not going to say their name, but I want to thank that person. I want to thank the person who kind of hooked me up with Tom originally, who kind of pointed my channel out to Tom and what I was saying. I really appreciate that. So thank you to them as well. Thank you to Tom. Thank you to the viewers. Thank you to everybody for keeping it respectful and not getting crazy. I really appreciate that. And as always, please, people, hit the like button, subscribe if you'd like, subscribe to the backup channels, follow me on Periscope, because you never know what can happen here. Hit the PayPal, Zelle, support the channel. And who would have ever thought when we started this, that we'd get to this point a few years later where we're talking to Tom Grant live. Who would have thought that would have ever have happened? That's incredible. I'm amazed, and I just want to thank Tom, and I want to thank you guys. And something else I need to say. Without you guys, this wouldn't have happened. A lot of you have supported the channel. You've commented, you've volunteered information. You've gathered information to help with the cases that we talk about. And this today would not have happened without you guys. Would have been impossible. So thank you to all the people that support the channel financially, research, comments, participating. Thank you, everyone. And I hope everyone has a wonderful, wonderful day. I'm going to get going.